Welcome to Cut Daisies and Unicorns, and it is a full episode day, and it's going to be exciting because it's always exciting. We're always excited to be here with you as we kind of, dig into some things and all kinds of subject areas, and it's a day that as we start to turn the corner from kind of the heat and humidity, we get into it's a beautiful day in Chicago. 73 degrees. The humidity is still a little bit higher, but it's a good day in Chicagoland.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I was going to welcome everyone to the continued flight pattern of two guys flying through the universe, making friends, telling more stories than we're making friends, but still. And it was lovely. When I got in the car this morning to come down to the studio, the Earthen Warehouse studio, that is.
Yeah.
56 degrees.
Ooh.
It was lovely. Yep. And then by the time I got in, because I get a little lake effect up there, then it was right at 60 degrees. Coming into Chicago with the steamy heat rising up from the pavement of the asphalt jungle.
It does do that.
Yeah, well,
which is the reason why you decided to change your headwear today, right?
Well, you know what? I've been wearing a hat for almost this week. Yeah. I told you my story about going to Dick's Sporting Goods, right?
At which maybe you should just go over it again.
So in getting ready to go to Hinterland, there was a list of the chairs that you couldn't bring.
Oh.
And so I went looking for stadium chairs that sit on, well, if you go to a stadium, so that you have a backer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, the item that I bought two of.
Yeah.
And I ruined one.
Uh-oh.
It just couldn't handle me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like wanting to really get comfy, and I kind of used it as a rocking chair, and it kind of.
And it wasn't meant for that?
Well, all of the pounds of me, and with what it was rated for, even it was rated for more than me, so it didn't work out well. But when I went there, and I got to the floor with the camping goods, I ran across one of my favorite brands, Dickies.
Right.
And so there, in the middle or the end of July, beginning of August, they were selling winter wear.
Season ahead.
Trying to be. And so I got a great Dickies coat, and then I got 4 different flavors of colors of my favorite Dickies cap, because I had a brown and I have an orange, and they are wearing thin. I've had them for some time, probably 6 to 8 years. So I mean,
it's a good number. It's a good number of years.
Got to watch my carbon footprint. And so anyway, long story short, that's when we went ahead and I have the black Dickies cap on. And so, and what I found is rather than wash it, hashtag, then I use the tape roller to get the dog hair off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The dog hair is something that attracts, all clothing.
Yeah. So hey, listeners, thanks for tuning in. We're excited to have you here, filling your ear holes with the verbal candy of Cut Daisies and Unicorns.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And super, super excited about this episode. And we again find ourselves in a place of, if you were hoping that you actually will get to know a little bit of where we're going, because we always do the trailer post-production, so that we can actually know what to talk about on the trailer.
Right. We always do the show and then do the trailer. So, I mean, you already should know that if you're a listener, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I just think it's great that sometimes you have to remind me. We've been doing this for almost 14 months. No, not 14 months. We're in our 9th month.
Right.
Yeah, we're in our 9th month of doing this.
Yeah, of putting them out. So we did start sometime, October, November, with actual, but then we didn't release them until
Right.
New Year.
Yeah. It took a while.
It took some refining.
Yes. But with that, so we are rounding the corner on doing this for a year.
Right.
But as far as published material, we're only at the 9-month mark.
Right.
We're at season 3, episode 8,
Mm-hmm.
and gaining traction. And so, but it just cracks me up because sometimes I'll get up to stretch my legs and, be able to just take a little break, and then I'm packing my bag, and Phil's like, "Hey, what about the trailer?"
Right. Can't forget about the trailer.
I'm like, I'd like to forget about the trailer, but not really. But in my head, I just get like rolling and going. And so
Right.
anyway, yeah. So, hey, you are going to, for the first time in a long time, experience large capacity seating for a rock and roll concert
It is true.
tonight.
Tonight.
So what time is said concert?
I think that they either open the doors or they start their like pre-bands. I think it starts at 6:00. I'm not planning to get there at 6, so
You're not.
no.
Yeah, purposely not.
Purposefully.
Yeah.
I mean, because you already it's not general admission, so you got your seats. They're
It's
already
not?
reserved.
Oh.
They do have a general admission section.
You're just not sitting there.
We're in actual seats
Okay.
that are reserved. Like we have a ticket that
Okay.
says this is the seat that you're in.
Okay.
Not just like, hey, come and storm the field or whatever.
All right. And you are at a field.
We are at the Wrigley Field.
Yeah. And drum roll please, the concert of
Guns N' Roses. Yeah.
Oh my word, Guns N'
Yeah,
Roses.
Guns N' Roses. I mean, and I would say they, Appetite for Destruction. I think I was going over this with you. Appetite for Destruction is their first kind of their big album that came out 1986 or 87.
Actually 1987.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I've got
I was
it
thinking-
pulled up on Wikipedia. Keep
Right.
going. Phil's not researched on this, and I know so little about Guns N' Roses.
Right.
Continue on.
Yeah, so then that was kind of where they came, and then they were popular based on Appetite for Destruction.
Uh-huh.
And then it was, their next big, I think 1991 was the Use Your Illusion 1.
Actually, their next studio album was in '88, called GNR Lies.
Okay.
It reached number 2 on the Billboard 200, sold 10 million copies.
So what was on Lies, though?
Patience.
But, okay, all right.
So then you have Use Your Illusion and Use Your Illusion 2, which was recorded simultaneously and released
Right.
in '91.
Yeah,
Which
which
man,
would've been-
you had right on.
And that was there was songs there that I think were on Terminator 2.
Yep,
And that
yep.
was a big kind of
You Could Be Mine was on
right.
Terminator 2.
Yeah, and so I think that also drove the people to pick up that album, which led it to be also a pretty big hit.
Well, and they did a cover of Live and Let Die.
That's right.
And so I think probably their cover of Live and Let Die is pretty well known with Rose's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Knocking on Heaven's Door.
is also a remake.
Yep.
And who originally did Knocking on Heaven's Doors?
Man, I want to say it's Eric Clapton. But, I could totally be wrong.
Some reason I was thinking that the original artist, or at least the writer, was Bob Dylan, but I don't know. That's just shooting from the hip. This is when we need like a research engineer here, But I think there were some people, because of their love for the Beatles.
No, you were right. Bob Dylan.
Is it? All right.
Yeah,
That's
Knocking on Heaven's Door. Songwriters Bob Dylan, produced by Gordon Carroll. And then, man, good job out of you. And I'm totally like knocked off the charts as far as Petty and Dylan did it in '73 together,
Mm-hmm.
and then see now here you go. In 1977, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton.
All right, so that's where you
That's
did
where
have
I did
Clapton's.
have Clapton. So I was not
You're not far.
totally off on that whole deal.
Yeah, so with the love of the Beatles, with Live and Let Die, some people really hated Guns N' Roses, and there's still people today who hate Guns N' Roses because they covered Live and Let Die, and even Knocking on Heaven's Doors, even though it wasn't a Beatles thing. And so I know that there's people today that really hate Guns N' Roses still based on that.
Well, I mean, that's like I have to get myself all brought together here to even like and come back to. And it's interesting too that they would grab a Beatles tune and they would grab a Dylan tune,
Right.
and put that into the mix.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think so with Guns N' Roses at that point in time, because they were so big, they also had an endless, almost endless supply of things that were going to, bring rock stars rock star fame, right? So they had lots of money, they had lots of groupies, they had lots of drugs.
Yeah.
And this is, as we know, kind of the avenue, which, I mean, Axl Rose apparently has never been a notoriously, nice person to be able to. I mean, like, nobody really in the industry is, like, lifting up Axl Rose as the, kind of a rock and roll. I'm trying to even figure out the best way to say that. He hasn't been one that people are like, "Oh, I just love Axl Rose."
Well, think about it this way. Let's just do a play on words.
Yeah,
Axle is really close to the word ass hole. And
it's true.
so even though I mean he just is
Yeah,
I mean just not, and he's a lead singer for a rock and roll band.
you're right.
I mean, so I mean, if I was going to put him through a psychological profile, I'm guessing he's a narcissist.
Oh yeah, I would assume. I don't
Yeah,
know for sure.
you
but-
know, I mean, he would have narcissistic tendencies. Now, all people who are listening are like, "Hold it, Coble, don't you front a rock and roll band?" And
weren't you?
the answer is, I may be an asshole, but I would not call it a rock and roll band.
Yeah,
I mean, my tendencies have always leaned to the folk and and country folk and variations of that. And
Right.
yeah, it even, I believe, led up to the breakup of the initial band I had put together. And it, yeah, because I mean there was feels for other things that should be done, and then that was pre-voice lessons and all those things, and I still don't know who I am as a musical artist, and I'm not really exploring it right now.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that you were right on the front of, with Axl. I mean, so not only I think with the narcissistic tendencies, but also then fame hits, and then you jump into a heavy use of all kinds of drug substances, illegal drug substances, that it just compiles. And I think that is ultimately what led to a breakdown of Guns N' Roses. Slash, which is I would say he would be an iconic rock star. And then people would hold up Slash as a iconic rock star. And he
Yeah.
wears the black hat, that kind of a top hat thing, with dark glasses all the time. And he's kind of still held in high regard in the musical community. But Axl, not so much. So
Yeah.
he went down that path, alienated pretty much everybody in the band. They I believe in 2008 they put out, a junk album, it's called Chinese Democracy.
Oh, that's
And-
funny. Yeah, you call that. And
Right.
actually, in the international success and band Turmoil,
Yeah.
then, yeah, the you skipped over the Spaghetti Incident
Oh,
is an album,
is another album.
which is actually an album of covers,
Hmm.
which was released shortly
know that one.
before Slash and let me see this.
Duffy, right? Oh,
Slash. Oh, the last studio album features Slash and McKeegan before their initial departure. So that was 1993,
Okay.
and then you went to the Chinese Democracy,
Mm-hmm.
2008.
Right.
So not only did the housing bubble burst, the banking industry crumble, but another sign of the times is when rock and roll bands implode with poorly. It was a long-awaited sixth studio album. I'm not a favorite of the number 6 anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd skip 6.
Go
just
to 6, just
just-
go right to 7.
go from 5 to 7.
Yeah. So I mean, that really, I think, was a. Yeah, I mean, you could tell that
It's
they
the
didn't-
most expensive rock album in history.
Is it really?
$14 million in production costs.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And how much did they lose then? Because I don't think that was a well, sold album.
Well, what's interesting though is that following, it was after Chinese Democracy tour, Slash and McKeegan rejoined the band in 2016 for the Not in This Lifetime tour, which
Right.
became the third highest grossing concert tour in a record, grossing $584 million by its conclusion in 2019.
Yeah.
I think that probably their label doesn't give a shit.
Right.
I mean, because they spent $14 million in production costs for an album that sucked, but they all got together and
Again, yeah.
and then on tour made that multiple times over. Which, I mean, for current listeners who understand how bad we are at math, you understand that I don't know how to do that multiplication on how much. I don't get percentages of increase either.
Right.
So anyway,
Well, to me, and that's where they figured out where they were actually, I mean, and most musicians today have figured out where they're going to make more capital is by touring, not by putting out an album anymore. Record sales, because of the whole streaming thing, you're not going to find that our artists are making much off of an album when they put it out, but they're going to make most of their money when they tour, because then you get seats, tickets that way, you get merch, you get all, there's that whole thing that plays out. So they had figured it out, like, hey, so on tour, what's Guns N' Roses going to play? They're not going to play Chinese Democracy.
no, they're playing off.
They're
their
going to
first.
play Appetite. They're going to play Use
Yeah.
Your Illusion. They're going to play,
Yeah.
Patience.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
so,
and they've got a full album. I mean, the patient. What's that one where it's both albums?
Use Your Illusion 1, 2.
Yeah. So that set them up with, they already have Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. They already have like a couple covers on there, and then they throw in Spaghetti Incident, and that's a whole album of covers. So basically they're giving themselves permission that anytime they want to rip out like a cover and play a cover publicly, I mean, the fans by the time they move into that, the band's on autopilot, but then they're becoming a cover band anyway, and people just like to hear the voices. They like the attitude.
Right.
They like the show, and they like being, as Seinfeld would say, out.
Mm-hmm.
People are not home. They're just out.
Right. So they're capitalizing again off of their, already past. I mean, and I guess you would say, is there anything wrong with that? No. I mean, people are still apparently willing to contribute to that. So
Yeah.
As long as, I mean, this is where, like, I would say, like, but if you're like, hey, for this, tour, we're gonna not play anything old, but only, like, we're gonna play our new stuff. Like, no, I don't think people are here to just listen to your new stuff.
I'm actually being inspired by this right now because
Yeah.
I have a live Eagles concert from Australia from their first farewell tour.
Yeah. Is it like not the When Hell Freezes Over tour?
Are we talking about the Eagles have a Hell Freezes Over tour?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't
Because
think
they
so.
broke up, and then they got that name from the rest of the band members. Say there's
Yeah.
the only time we'll ever get back together is when hell freezes over.
Okay, all right.
So
No, I think this was after they got together for that, and then they declared, hey, we're going to call this our Farewell 1 tour. We're pretty sure we'll have a farewell. There'll be other farewell tours, but for right now, this is the thing. But I have that, and what's hilarious is they actually do take time to introduce some songs that the singer songwriters, like, I mean, Joe Walsh comes out and he's like, hey, he goes, this is a new song I wrote. He's like, the only thing is, I just want to let you know, I got drunk once. It just lasted for 21 years. He goes, and so I'm sober, and I think it's a song One Day at a Time. And so, but yeah, like, so I'm thinking, well, maybe when I go back to the studio, maybe I pull out the Eagles tour and listen to that, and because I'm not gonna pull up Guns N' Roses.
yeah, I don't think you should. I mean, we take a look at. I mean, you see a band like the Rolling Stones, who how many farewell tours have they been on?
That's a great question.
I mean, they're like, yeah. I mean, and Elton John, right? He had I think, or is this his farewell tour?
He's
right
in
now?
the middle of it,
Right.
and so because of he started his farewell tour. It was planned for 3 years,
Yeah.
and but in the middle of it, COVID hit. So he's on the second year leg of the 3-year journey to do a farewell tour.
All right.
Yeah.
I knew that he was on some, does that mean that he's also going to have farewell tour 1, 2, 3 until it, or like, because I think the farewell meant like, hey, what we're gonna do.
So long, farewell.
You may have never seen us live, so this might be your last chance. But then it actually turns out like, no, like this isn't the last chance.
Right.
You just, right, you're going to find us again on a farewell tour.
So I Googled how many farewell tours, Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And this is there's an article, 14 farewell tours that weren't actually goodbye.
Yeah. So even when the Rolling Stones drummer died, they filled the dude, they filled his space like already when he was dying. And like, hey, we already got a new drummer. We're already going to be on tour. I mean, like,
Wow.
There's no stopping. It's the same thing that happened with the ZZ Top guy. When he died, they also filled in some, like, boom.
Oh, really? There's a new bass player for
Yeah, because
ZZ
they
Top
were
already?
also going to be going on tour.
Oh,
so it was
wow.
Like, boom, like, yeah. So I don't know. Bands, I think, because of the income generating, part of the tour stuff is that they're like, yeah, we can't stop. So like even death can't stop us.
Well, what I will say in regards to, and by the way, that article that I just quoted, like 14 farewell tours that weren't actually goodbye,
Yeah.
it's poorly written
Oh.
and not put together in a way to easily digest while you're recording live. And the other thing that I will say is that when Elton John took his hiatus and wasn't traveling, he and his husband were raising their kids. It wouldn't surprise me based on the length of time, even though he wrote a ton for whether it's Disney, Broadway musicals, with actually Rocket Man, the movie, was done by his production company, Rocket Production or Rocket Films.
Oh yeah.
And so, I mean, the dude's been working. And he would actually say that not only is he a drug addict, he's also an alcoholic, he's also a sexaholic, and he's also a shopaholic. And currently has times when he opens up and goes through all of the closets and has his own garage sale for people to come in and buy his stuff. So it's not going to the dump. I mean, thank God for that.
Right.
But I like in the one article that I did on some research for, the summer concert series. Then it was like there was one year that he spent like $165 million in the first quarter.
Whew.
And if you look at his net worth, I mean, like, this is like, hey, net worth is like stop in time. This is what he's worth right now. But I mean, he's got royalties, coming in, and he's doing all this stuff.
Yeah, and that's the difference between a rock star and an artist. I mean, like an artist who's starting out, or an artist or an indie artist who aren't able to pull in this amount of money for royalties.
Yeah. But you and I have talked about, when we've talked about Elton John before, that really there was about 6 years, and a majority of what he'll come out and play are things that he and his writing partner wrote together in those 6 years. Mm-hmm. Now, there are other gems, beauties. I mean, like Candle in the Wind, Princess Diana passed, and he wrote this song, on her, about her, for her passing, funeral kind of thing, that gripped the world. But still, I'm coming back to that and saying that because actually when I do the math on Guns N' Roses, the productivity of their creativity for the height of who they were, guess how long?
Maybe 10 years.
No, 6.
Oh.
Actually 6.
Okay.
We're seeing and that's why I say I would skip album 6. Go from 5 and move to 7, because there's something about that number 6 that really, but breakthrough and mass popularity, 1987, 89-ish with Appetite for Destruction, right? The next line down, international success and band turmoil, 1990 to 1993. So if you do 87 to 93, you're talking about 6 years. There was a 6-year span. So the real question is, how much time does it take to get sick of somebody who's being an asshole in your life?
Right.
6 years.
6 years.
How long can a person continue a personal downward spiral through chemical addiction and being a jerk? People in your life can deal with you for about 6 years. Then check off the list. Something's got to change.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
I'm going to keep watching it. I'm going to keep watching it. There was a conversation that I had with a bass player who was in a band I was in, and his point is that why first albums, and I've said this before, why first albums are always so good is because it's the accumulation of a lifetime of creativity, and it's the best of all that's been put out. And so the producers go through, they gather all the stuff. Now, in the Ray Charles biographic movie, they actually approached Ray, and Ray came to the table as a cover singer. He covered all the greats and could sound like them all. And they're like, hey, we need you to be you. Like, we see something in you, but you're not giving us. And he had already recorded an album, was working through another album, and they were like, we got to find you. And that's that. I think that what I would say is I think I've been a great cover singer, as far as like finding out my voice and who I really am musically. I don't think I've gone deep enough. I've had the right people asking me the right questions of what that is. But when you start looking at a Jeff Tweedy with Wilco, and seeing what that guy does to get to the gold that he puts out. Now, not everybody has an appetite for Jeff Tweedy and Wilco.
Right.
But having read his biography, what I would put out there is that he, I mean, the dude is like always turning on a recorder and like working. He is songsmithing every day for 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
And when you know that,
incredible.
right?
Hmm.
And I mean, no judgment on, I don't mean anything by this statement, but I don't think the guy observes a Sabbath or takes a Sunday off. I mean, his life is music,
Music.
and so this is a part of what he does. And yet, when I also go back to listening to Discovering the Eagles, it was a biographic film, and interviewing all the guys. They talked about being roommates with Brown back in the day, and how they learned to write songs. Glenn Fry, I think it was mentioned that he's like, Jackson Brown was, like he goes, I was living in this little closet underneath the stairs and subletting that space, but Jackson Brown would get up, I'd hear the tea kettle go off, he'd walk over to the piano, he'd start playing through a song, he'd play through a chorus, he'd play through the chorus 15 times, and then it'd break, and I'd hear the, kettle go off, and he'd pour another cup of tea, and then he'd come back to the piano, and, he goes, I totally had the song down in my head after how many times. He's like, oh, this is how you write a song, working through. Where, like, with Elton and his songwriting partner, the songwriting partner just was words for days and would write down prose and just the melodic words put together. And Elton just is the melody person and sits down and reads through the words, see how it moves him, and he basically pulls a Tom Petty and basically divines melody out of him. All these different things, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it's fascinating what you mentioned as far as like the culmination, right, of life, like first album then
Right.
becomes part of that, like why it's so good.
Yeah.
And maybe it goes back to movies too. Like we always talk about the first movie,
Oh.
especially you're looking at trilogies or whatever.
Yeah.
Like the first movie is always going to, because that's the thing that you were focusing on first, and then it becomes a hit, and then what Hollywood does is like, oh, let's follow that up with a sequel.
Yeah. They
It's
can't.
like, whoa, I didn't even plan on a sequel. I didn't even look at this in a like multi-hit thing. I was pouring into one.
Well, and so, like, I'll ask another question for our listeners to consider. Why in the world who's the guy who like filmed E.T.? Spielberg.
Spielberg, yeah.
Why is Spielberg doing West Side Story? It's a remake. Why? Because the content of West Side Story as a musical is absolutely brilliant.
Right.
And it was one person telling a story and telling the story through song, with, again, dualistic mindset. You have two opposing,
Right.
and you have culture, and you have this beautiful story. Well, okay, why does Spielberg not hire a writer to write West Side Story 2? Because he's smart enough to know that anything after one would be completely lacking.
Right.
Now I will say this based on our conversation, because you influence me, if you didn't know that.
We influence each other.
There you go. I was walking past the DVD section in Target and saw the John Wick trilogy. And I did the math real quick. And for less than a cost of one ticket per movie to go to the theater,
Yeah.
I could own the trilogy.
Hmm.
So you know what? Maybe I go and watch a little Eagles and watch a little John Wick 1. Yeah, such a great story.
Right. All because of a dog, right?
I think when artists or creatives, or when people who are pursuing something, they're like, man, how come the good stuff's already out of me? Well, then I would say, What humanity's aching for and crying for is an absorption.
Yeah.
You have to take in more.
And
Young songwriters can't write good shit
right.
because they haven't lived enough life. And speaking of that, there is a movie on Netflix, Wind River, that was
Haven't
produced
seen it.
by Netflix,
Mhm.
and it's about an Indian girl who dies, murder case, FBI. There's another guy whose daughter died, and he's basically a tracker for game and wildlife. Fantastic story, really, really good. And it just again comes out that in the loss of a child, this guy sits down next to the Indian man who had lost his daughter and said, he goes, you know what? Bottom line is if you numb it out, you will numb all the memories of her out.
Hmm.
You need to sit with your suffering.
Mhm.
And in your suffering, you will be able to remember every memory with her. And I thought, whoa.
Yeah.
And he said, basically, he was telling a friend, I don't want to lose you to whatever you could turn to,
Mhm.
but let's sit in the suffering. And both gentlemen had lost daughters.
Mhm.
Let's sit in the suffering, but let's live in joy of their memory.
Hmm.
Isn't that weighty?
Hmm. It's real weighty. Wow.
And so what in our Western cultured minds, in our pursuit
Mhm.
to avoid pain and to avoid suffering,
Right.
then how are we negating some of the greatest gifts that have ever been given to us?
Mhm.
But you can't have a 16-year-old writing a song about suffering. And I
About love and loss.
right.
Mhm.
And I shouldn't say that there isn't someone who couldn't do that. Okay?
Mhm.
But I'm telling you, time, the wisdom that people are looking for through these musical prophets, time gives experience. And experience, no human will go through their life without the experience of loss, without the experience of suffering. And that turned a little cog in me.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, wow, okay.
Mm.
And so, I there is great content in first release. And I think then what happens is when you sign contracts to be able to produce, then you have to dig into places. Now, there's the other thing. You get to
Yeah.
explore places that you've never been willing to explore, and some good things can come out of that.
Right.
But just think of everything on the cutting room floor from the first. There could be great wisdom in going back to what wasn't good enough for the first
Mhm.
is good enough for the second, because what you're going to come up with for the second,
Mhm. Well, and that's what I think when you're looking at what we call like either one-hit wonders, but I would even say like one-hit wonder album-wise too,
yeah,
is because people then weren't willing to go where they needed to go for albums 2 through whatever.
yeah,
And maybe it was because, and that's a great connection that you were making as far as like where you need, like, because we're not willing, we don't want to go through suffering very long. So what do? We try to either numb it out or we try to get past it any way possible.
avoidance.
Right.
Avoidance, or what you were using, like this idea of running away.
Yeah.
I mean, you flee.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, no, it's a really, I don't know. I was really taken back and I was really pleased. But it reminds me of our last episode
Yeah.
concerning transformation, in that transformation is change.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to work through the change, and if you're going to expect change to occur without some kind of pain,
Yeah.
so what is pain? Pain is suffering, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm not lining us up so that we're a bunch of masochists,
Right. Right.
and yet what I would come back to is that there is pain that is worth, and pain's what is pain is weakness leaving the body.
Right.
Well, whatever. I all I know is that comfortable cycles are not painful.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is then, hey, if we're going to grow, if we're going to evolve, there are some people that, I mean, when again, coming to the matrix, they don't want to take a pill. I mean, like, give me the X's and O's and let it be the hallucination of the life that I'm living, and I'll have these walls built up, and it'll all work out. And then there's this other part of pursuit of, hey, what do you think, and how will this work? And so transformation,
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm happy to report, week 4 is going splendidly.
Right.
And I did the math on it. I literally am doubling the amount of time in the studio that I'm doing by some small little changes. Now, when my alarm clock rang this morning at 5 and 5:15, and I hit snooze until 5:30 and then fell back asleep, but still, I mean, like, as far as the pursuit of what's going on and with the changes in life, and then I take a look in the studio, and it's funny because Amy, after we were at the studio Sunday, she's like, now I get the part where you've been telling me that the pottery studio, like when you go off to the pottery, and somebody says, hey, have fun at the studio.
Right.
She's like, it's work. She's like, you didn't take a break for the whole time we were there. And she goes, and now I see how driven you are when you are there. And she's like, and I can see where the time that you put into a piece of pottery is beyond what I ever expected.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's enlightenment. How is there enlightenment? There was enlightenment by experience.
Mm-hmm.
When she was able to experience what the regimen was, then she was able to move into understanding. And I think that if our listeners would just kind of grab onto this part, that these are the reasons why we have the discussions that you're like, I hate this shit. I've said shit so much because we were doing Guns N' Roses and earlier in that I'm just apparently on a swearing tangent. Sorry, everybody. But the thing is we talk about things that aren't easy to talk about. We talk about things that aren't easy to listen to. We do it for the sake of enlightenment. And people are like, but I don't, it's too Eastern mysticism, culture, growth. Let's use a Christianese word. The Christianese word of growth. This is for your spiritual growth. It's for your mental growth. It's for the growth of you. It's for the growth of humanity. Mm-hmm. That's why we move into this. And we love to give you the opportunity. I'm going to finally look at the camera. I've been looking at Phil for this whole episode. We finally give you the opportunity to be able to see the aha moments within our lives of when this is occurring. And so then you can at least identify your own aha moments, mm-hmm. and you can identify with the part of what it means to be growing as a human. Or I could say it, when moving into the desire to be enlightened, mm-hmm. the idea of enlightenment is that more light would be shed. Right. It's so that the dark places can have light to see, and so that you, as just as in the beauty of the sunrise. I took the garbage out this morning, and it was 6:13. The sun was beginning to peak, and what did I get to see? It's the beauty of the aha. It's the transition before it's fully light. It's the darkness becoming to be overtaken by the sunlight that allows the cast of the beautiful colors to shine through our atmosphere. And so what you get to enjoy is you get to enjoy the beauty of the transition. The goal isn't the daylight. The goal is a continue translation from the place of where you are that currently may have light. It's not in complete darkness, but it's moving towards a place where there will become full light in that moment. And so it's in the ahas that we are able to make a transformation to an enlightenment that allows us to be able to grow. That movie that I watched last night, on a whim, I had seen FBI Agent and I had seen Murder. And I said to Amy, I'm like, hey, I think I found a movie that was made in 2021 that we may enjoy. And then thankfully Netflix, who's tracking us, said it was a 98% match. Mm-hmm. All right, so then we watch it. But what happened through that cultural experience of us taking in this thing? And, and I was like, oh, this is what I can do with my sorrow. This is what I could do with suffering. Mm-hmm. This is what I can. Don't flee it. Don't numb it. Take in the memory of what's connected to that and what good can I remember. And I actually, during the movie, started calculating that in a specific moment of sorrow in my own life, what good things had I been looking past in the pursuit to avoid the sorrow? What a helpful tool.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking, so Buddhism says all life is suffering.
Oh, I didn't see, and this is where I get to show up as an idiot. I'm enlightened.
But yeah,
I almost bought a Buddha at Goodwill that last week. It didn't have a price tag on it, so I didn't pick it up.
But in there, that's a concept that's in there, like all life is suffering. We get that, though. Like, all humanity understands that there's going to be suffering. It doesn't matter if you're an atheist, a theist, or somewhere where you're trying to split the middle somewhere. We all understand that life has suffering in it. Now, what do you do with that? That's what we've been that's what we've been asking. And I think that what we understand then is that you don't want to waste hurt. Because wasting hurt says I'm going to just ignore it. I'm going to numb it. I'm going to, we figure out the ways in which we can get out of it or move past it. But what we're saying right now is the same thing. Like, let's not waste this. And then we would say, for an artist, what are you going to do to not waste that hurt, to not waste that moment? Because you shouldn't just move past it. You shouldn't just move past hurt. You shouldn't just move past suffering. You should say, what is it that what did I learn? And then how is it that, you can continue to use that?
Well, and I think that's where in forms of meditation, that the goal is that that in quieting oneself to focus on maybe one point of hurt or one point of suffering is then to be able to call out and say, okay, universe, okay, higher power, okay, greater being than I am, okay, unseen deity, okay, God, whichever term our listener would be more comfortable with. Okay, what can you teach me? What can you bring to me that will help me grow? What can I learn? And what life lesson is to be learned? And for me then, as a father, it's what lesson can be passed on to the next generation. And both my children have said, hey, Dad, anything you got to share, we're willing to listen to. Because it informs us, it helps us. It's one of the things of having the loss of my dad 26 years ago. It's the thing that I wish that I had, was that he, in being further down the path of life, would be able to speak to me. I don't have that physical presence of that. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't have people in my life who aren't further down the path.
Right.
And as a student, that I would be able to come to and say, hey, what's it look like from your perspective right there? But, you know, that I think that there are some viable arguments for what it means to get quiet, and then even there could be people who are like, well, I've never really considered myself numbing myself. I've never considered myself.
Of course.
Well, that's why we're trying to have an
Right.
enlightening conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so we can look at the socially acceptable ways of numbing yourself, which, you know, have become somewhat of a, oh, yeah, well, I mean, that's just what people do.
Well, I mean, I think that Elton John's a prime example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it can be drugs, it can be alcohol, it can be shopping, it can be sex, it can be food, it can be, I mean, any way of escapism.
Right.
Somebody could say, well, I like to read. Well, do you like to read to the point of avoidance? You know, or, you know, like I like to study. You know, we've all heard of the professional student,
Right.
the one who can never, like, ever be done with furthering their education. You know, do you have others on your mind?
No, I think that, I mean, that any of those ways, I mean, like, if you told somebody, like, yeah, I'm a professional student, you know, I'm like, you know, but are you using whatever it is, even the socially acceptable, to ignore what actually is happening?
Yeah.
Because that's not good. No matter what it is, even if it's accepted by everybody around you,
Right.
you're still avoiding.
Right.
I mean, you're still going through and using whatever tool. You'd say, well, you know, I used alcohol in the past and now I'm sober. Okay, but have you, in terms of alcoholism, turned into a dry drunk, meaning you found anger or you found self-righteousness to
Yeah.
be the thing that you're going to cover up? I mean, like,
Yeah.
so there's always something that's underlying, I think, that we're like, you know, we just don't want to focus on. We don't want to, you know, kind of highlight that, you know, like, in us. So what do? We just figure out socially acceptable ways of
Yeah.
covering things up, ignoring it, move past it.
Yeah. Yeah, there can be a very nice numb.
Hmm.
And I just pause with letting that settle in for people to think about. I can be numb and nice.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make your numbness healthier
Right.
than someone's reckless numbness.
Mm. Right.
It's just their reckless numbness is more of a pain in the ass than your nice numbness.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would be then like the uncomfortable, the awkward of the pushing against the social norms of covering things up versus the, you know, like, not so socially. I mean, you can, and here's the difference, right? You can use alcohol socially acceptable, right? Happy hour.
Right.
What is it? After work, we go and drink until we forget the day. I mean, happy hour is like, I'm going to drink until I'm happy, meaning, right? So if you're looking at that's acceptable. Why? Because restaurants even reward you for a happy hour,
Yeah.
which turns into more hours, not just 1 hour
Right.
of happy.
Their goal is
Right.
not you being there for an hour.
Right.
It's-
Socially acceptable, but you turn happy hour into me standing on a bar and peeing on the crowd. Unacceptable. Like you just made yourself completely, like an ass in front of everybody. That's not acceptable, though.
Right.
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 You've now crossed a line.
Yeah.
Into what was well. Why was that? I mean, because you're still sticking with what society says is good and what's not good.
Right. Right.
So I mean, there's always that line. I mean, like there's the socially acceptable.
Yeah. It's true.
I mean, so what we had during the opioid epidemic, right?
Yeah.
Is that pain pills are completely acceptable for you to take.
As long as they're prescribed by a doctor.
They're prescribed by a doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then they overprescribed. Then they said at some point, wait a second, this isn't good. We should pull this back. And then what happened? They're like, no, but now I'm hooked.
Yeah.
You told me it was acceptable.
Yeah.
Everyone else told me it was acceptable. They were on it too. But now I can't pull back.
So I was watching a CSI episode yesterday.
Yeah.
And one of the lead singers for this band, quote unquote, overdosed with heroin.
Mm-hmm.
It ended up being an air bubble embolism through his heart. And for those who watched season 3, episode 6 or something like that, you'll know right what I'm talking about. But the funny part is in the interview, one of the investigators was talking to the lead guitarist, and he's like, so apparently the whole band had said, we're going to go sober for the sake of the band being together and making money.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, oh, so you're a heroin addict? He goes, yeah, I'm using right now. He's like, so you had a needle? He goes, dude, I don't shoot that stuff. I snorted it up my nose. Like, there's an acceptable way to do heroin versus if you're a junkie, you're shooting it up, you're mainlining it, so to your point, even within drug users,
there's an acceptable and unacceptable.
Is that hilarious or what? Yeah. I mean, and yet, we're talking 3 years ago or 4 years ago, the major cause of death on the river between Illinois and Iowa, heroin, because of opioid use.
Right.
Because people who the doctors wouldn't give it to, then their first step is to buy prescription opioids on the street.
Right.
But when demand went so high, now we're back to Breaking Bad. When
the supply was gone.
When they were first selling that blue stuff, like they were getting $25 or $45 a teenth. By the time you get to the last season, that blue stuff is selling for $300 a teenth. I mean, like it's supply and demand, and so it's just one of those things. Well, once your pocketbook runs out, then it's how can I get that? And people wonder how alcoholics resort to drinking mouthwash.
Great.
Jason Isbell, who's been sober for many years now, talked about that during the pandemic, he and his wife were, enclosed and stuff like that. Well, I mean, he drank mouthwash and got a buzz. And they even had conversations around what mouthwash to have in the house in regards to that, because, but apparently he was being a real big asshole in the recording studio, and they got in a fight and whatever and stuff like that. But I'm not sure if that reset his sobriety date but he wanted to be very open about it. He's like, man, I did this, and it was like, it affected me enough that I, like, just even out of a gargle swallow, and people are like, well, how does that happen? Well, you can buy Listerine cheaper than you can buy a bottle of Jack, and they're like,
and
well,
you don't need an ID to be able to purchase it.
This is true too. And so, I mean, we're talking about habits, and we're talking about these lines and socially acceptable, socially not acceptable. And, people in the back of their minds, they got to be like, where in the world do these guys study?
How did we get here? How did we get here?
Well, I think
Thanks, Axl Rose.
I think. Yeah, thanks, Axel. Listen to that word. What does Axel sound like? Right.
Right.
But I think we talk about drug use and we talk about alcohol use just in lieu of people's familiarity. But then to bridge the gap, to go back to what you were saying, is that, another major area that probably is easy to bring up to the forefront would actually be work, workaholism.
Oh, yeah.
Again, it's the pursuit. It looks nice on the outside. Well, I'm taking care of my family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm providing for my family. And yet, what's left in the wake?
Yeah.
For those of you who are, unfamiliar with the English language, wake is the churned up water behind a boat.
Mm-hmm.
What's left in the wake? And
depending on the speed of the boat or the size of the boat, the wake can be pretty big.
Yeah. And it's created by the vessel going through the water, but also by the propeller. Mm-hmm. And so it's this churned upness of what's left in the wake. Yeah, that's where that saying comes from. Mm-hmm. So workaholism, getting lost there. I think one of the things to be able to consider is, take time to just reflect on, is there something, or is there someone, or are there relationship conversations, that you're running from, like you're saying, I don't want to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so lots of stuff, man.
It is lots of stuff.
All over Guns N' Roses.
I know.
Thanks, Princess Jules, for bringing us to this conversation.
Oh, yeah. So that's, avoidance. Avoiding the things that are uncomfortable. Yeah. And instead of running, it's good to also face it and receive it and to figure it out. Yeah. So what are you trying to avoid right now? Tough conversations. Yeah.
And I think that there's a difference between knowing that there could be things in your future that you won't enjoy, but then you have to be able to take a look. And I start looking down other checklists. Hey, am I taking time out to be well rested? Usually during a day, if I get irritated like 3 or 4 times, when I walk in the door, I'll just be like, hey, Amy, by the way, I'm totally off because everybody on this earth is pissing me off. So if I seem irritated, just know it's not you. There's something going on with the moon right now.
Right.
But on the flip side, she can walk up to me and she's like, hey, are you sad? And I'm like, I didn't know I was yet.
I could be.
Are you angry? Well, I could be. We can go from 0 to 10, in no time there.
It's kind of like the Hulk, right? His secret is he's always angry.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. And so, being self-aware, I'm amazed at how many human beings aren't. And yet then you get to look in the mirror and you can see that not all days, like even when we talk about this whole idea of an awakening or like enlightenment, and like I'll find myself like if I'm pitted against someone And I'll be like, oh, dualistic mind. Thank you, ego, for showing up. You.
SOB.
There you go. That one's a better one. Mine started with an M and ended with a ucker.
Right. I figured.
So, I mean, because who shouldn't talk nasty to their ego? But, yeah. And then, I think that there's, I guess I'm just lost in pondering this whole thing. It's good.
Yeah, and I think it is a good place to figure that out. I mean, if you're again, I mean, we bring up dualism
Quite a bit.
And I think that it does. I mean, we have to figure out what's being pitted against, another.
Yeah.
And even in yourself, like as you're saying, like your ego is fighting against your maybe humility, right? Your ego is saying stand out and, and be noticed and be identified and be powerful. And yet you're like, no, but I don't want, I mean, there's something in me that's saying that doesn't sound good. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And there's, again, two things that are at work. Now, what you would know is, of course, there's more than two things at work even in yourself.
Yeah.
But we like to be able to create the problems. And usually it's it's only two sides. And we create two sides then instead of having multiple sides or multiple things at work, no, it's only two sides because then I can fight a battle.
Well, and it goes the number 2 versus the number 3. Since we're on numbers I don't like 6.
Right.
So but that's the part of dualism. When 3 enters in, then it becomes community.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a tiebreaker.
Right.
So if you have two opposing views, you've got a tiebreaker. You've got the third person who's going to either be a friend to you both, or I would say that in those general gatherings of people, if you introduce the third becomes the mediator.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you,
but you're also dealing with triangulation, right? So the dualism is also going to say we want that third person to be on our side. Not just as a mediator, I want to grab that third, bring them in so that we can fight the one.
Well, that would be a very strong dualistic-minded ego.
Right.
Very, very strong.
Yeah.
To the point of narcissism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think if for those who are listening who have a faith structure in Judaism or in Christianity, what they would see is a triune picture. And now this is based on the teaching of Richard Rohr off of his book called The Divine Dance. Mm-hmm. But look at what the sacred texts say. There is one mediator between God and man, the man, Jesus Christ. And so Jesus, the Christ, is the mediator. And so, but I think that if you look in community, now, it would depend on the weakness of the members of that community. But I think that there's at least an opportunity for one out of the 3 would be a mediator type. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, if we're to type them, then there's probably the person who could be, this is based on a Western cultured religious philosophy. Mm-hmm. There would one be who would be the father figure theos, which would be probably saying, hey, I've got greater wisdom here, and I do want you to be on my side for these things that I think that are objectively better than the way that you could think. And then you have the pneuma, you have the spirit, or as my Methodist pastor friend would say, Mother God. And so you have the feminine present to be able to gather, to cuddle, to, in mothering, to
convict.
There you go.
Moms do that well.
Yeah, moms can do that well. And so, but yeah, it's just an interesting look into where rock and roll can take you down the road.
That's true.
6 years. Take a look. Take a look at 6-year developments. Take a look at 6-year relationships. Take a look at the phases of 6 years and all that goes in with that. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think that's just an interesting character study then to find out where else has that been present in rock and roll history. What other things didn't come about, like what could have been better or could have been but based on these personalities or whatever it might have been that it wasn't.
Well, according to NCIS and the lovely Mr. Gibbs,
Mm-hmm.
there is no such thing as coincidence. I think it's Rule 39. But I mean, I just stumbled on this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's shown up a couple different times, and I'm like, oh my word, look at this. And if I check this line and check this line, and scratch and knot and subtract in 6 years.
Well,
I mean, and we're talking about 19. What was that?
87.
Yeah, the turmoil ended. Yeah,
93.
so yeah, you're looking at 1987. So, 87, 97, 2007. I mean, like you're looking at 20 plus 25 years down the road.
Mm.
And I'm telling you, you're going to hear Welcome to the Jungle tonight.
Right.
Sweet Child of Mine.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet Child, oh mine.
Oh my. Because it's Irish.
I guess. Paradise City. Patience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe Used to Love Her. I don't know. You'll have to look up that song later.
All right. All right.
But yeah, so I look at some of the band that I like it. So 90s era grunge, Stone Temple Pilots.
Okay.
Philip Wyland was the head, the lead singer. Also ran into addiction issues. Also apparently had some probably narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah.
That ended the same way. They removed Philip Wyland, from that. I mean, he eventually, it wasn't too long ago, a few years back now, died of an OD. And so what you find is that there's other bands who have a similar story. Some of them end differently because of whether it was rehab or things that help people to start thinking clearly. That they start saying, hey, you know what? This addiction has led us in a bad direction. Let's get some help. And then let's start down a path of clear-headedness.
Well, I think Joe Walsh would speak to that, though. I mean, like, really, it took the dying of the Eagles for him to be able to have life. I mean, like, the really cool thing is for people who can grab onto the reality of, what hole they're in, that takes them to a place where, there's gratitude, but I'm sure it was not fun. But I mean, there was a lot of dissension going on in that whole band too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rock and roll.
But it's just interesting then to be able to consider what would it have looked like for Guns N' Roses to be healthy. You look at, I'm going back to same era, like Red Hot Chili Peppers. So they actually talk about that they went through like band counseling.
Huh.
Because there were some similar things that were happening in Red Hot Chili Peppers, and they were saying, "Hey, let's get some help, not just in a chemical dependence wise. let's get some help to actually walk through this like a married couple would go through marriage counseling.
Yeah.
And they say we need to go through band counseling because there's psychology that needs to be at work here as well. So I look at those and they are still together and they're still making music. But there were some times that they had that were like, all right, this is a rough patch. What do we need to do? Well, we need to get some counseling. We need to get some work together. And that's the same thing that we've been calling out to people is it's time to identify some of the things that are happening for you and not just sweeping it under the carpet and trying to move past it, because you'll never move past it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll just be hidden for a while.
Yeah, that's true. And like help can come in a variety of different forms. You could be a person that has the wealth of people in your life that can help you transform. There's people who can go to a psychologist and from there may need a referral to a psychiatrist, meaning that, hey, some of the things that you're facing really do need medical attention with medication.
Yeah.
Some psychologists will work with your family doctor, and that the team together can be able to keep an observation going. So that's an option too.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's counselors. They don't have the degree of psychologist or psychiatrist, but they have studied counseling.
Right.
And they are professional counselors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I personally, and let me also say, there is another term out there that's been around for hundreds of years. It's called the spiritual director.
Mm-hmm.
This came out of the Roman Catholic Church. There is a network of spiritual directors out there. And how I know about this is my mom is a spiritual director. And she's been studying this, I think, around 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's not somebody can hang a shingle and say, but I mean, they've been through extensive training with people who have done that. It's multi-generational, that kind of thing. It's an opportunity. But my mom and I have had open conversation. She's like, I listen to some of the directees who are interviewing me, and they say, hey, where do I go from here? And my answer is, you need to go to your doctor,
Mm-hmm.
or you need to get a different counselor. Like, they don't even wear the hat of counselor.
Right.
And so, like, now, that being said, you look at those different avenues and different things that can happen. And I'm going to go to Ford versus Ferrari as a cultural reference. If you haven't seen the movie, rent it. Me personally, I own 2 copies. There's one on my Apple account that I can pull up online. If I don't have online, I've got the DVD in the studio. I mean, like, it's just so good. But Ford versus Ferrari, I'm sorry. I'm not taking a Ford Pinto into a Lamborghini dealership for a tune-up.
Right.
Me personally, I'm not going to take my Toyota FJ into a place that changes oil, and just because they tell me that my engine needs to be flushed, going to have them flush the engine.
Right.
I will go directly to Toyota and say, can you look at the oil? Can you look at my engine? And what care needs to happen to this vehicle? Why? Because they know their product. So, if you got problems with your head, don't go to a foot doctor.
It's true.
If emotionally you're feeling disconnected in ways that is unsettling to you, or you have people in your life who are, if you have repeat conversations from people in your life that say that you are disconnected and you are distracted and we're concerned for you, or change needs to happen, take some outside advice and start down the path to go see somebody who can help. And that would not be an eyes, ear, nose, throat specialist, ENT.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go to a cardiologist for something that's going wrong in your for your emotional being, you know?
Right.
On the other side, if you have chest pains, don't take time to see your psychiatrist. Get to the cardiologist.
Right. Or if there are current chest pains, you may need to go to the hospital.
Just call 911. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but we're stating the obvious because the obvious isn't necessarily something that people run to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, it's true.
Right.
I mean, and those are, like it seems obvious. Like, yeah, if I've got a heart issue, I'm not going to see a foot doctor. If I have a, like that seems obvious.
Yeah.
But we don't always make the obvious choices.
The connection. Yeah.
We can sound like we can use these, well, what I would say is like absurd, like connect, but yet when it comes to the real things, we still make the absurd. Like we don't connect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why it's important to have people in your life who you can trust their voice in conversations when, things are going down and stuff like that.
Right.
Hey, and by the way, we're not painting a picture for perfect.
No.
Just to let you know, this isn't, we're not saying that, life is unicorns and rainbows.
Right.
Yeah. No, but I think I think that comes out earlier when we talk about suffering and stuff like that, and not every response is a perfect response, and I think then that just pushes to the place on, like, when you find yourself where accusatorily you've been wrong, are you able to say you're sorry? And I'm sorry isn't, well, I'm sorry for being a jerk.
I'm sorry that you were offended.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what is that? Yeah. So and to me, it's not, and we're not having this conversation because we've figured it out, and we want everybody to travel the same path. Like we still haven't figured out everything. I mean, but we're in this journey, and that we're in a process of saying we've seen this. We haven't always responded the right way or well, but we're trying.
Yeah.
And that's life.
Yeah. And I think that the trying part is we go back to this thing we're going to talk about, we won't talk about today. But the idea of what does it mean to be a lifelong student?
Yeah.
And what I can tell you is, our perceived perception in this moment is that even when we look at a Thursday, Thursday to me is an interesting day. It's kind of a turn day because, we call it Friday Eve at our house. So it's a Thursday. Well, we had been through enough of the week. A lot of times when I walk in here on a Thursday, what I'm doing is reflecting on what's happened this week.
Yeah.
And so in anticipation, and so, yeah, I mean, we keep growing, and it just is a goal to be able to grow and be able to move on to the next thing. What are we going to come up with a title for this one?
Something with rock and roll.
All right.
Yeah.
Rock and roll reflections.
Rock and roll reflections.
Yeah.
Where does Axl Rose take us?
What does Axl sound like? Rock and roll reflections. colon. That's funny. What does Axel sound like? This is going to be awesome. I'll be like, the hint is in the title.
That's true. It's true.
Man, I just make you laugh and I make me laugh too. This is like a 2-for-1.
It is.
Yeah. Buy one, get one free.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good place for, I mean, we sufficiently have challenged ourselves, and I believe anybody who's out there listening.
Yeah, I think so. Which is great, because it's not even like 12 p.m. on a Thursday,
Right.
and we have a sufficient challenge for the day.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good.
All right. Hey, folks, just remember, we really would like to hear from you. And so maybe you go back to the episode about catalytic moments and things that have changed your life. Maybe you're like, what are you guys talking about? I'd say go back to season 3, episode 7 and or 8. See, here I get confused. It was episode 8 was transformation. And with giggles and feathers and tickles and all that stuff that nobody's really heard about, because we looked at our numbers and stuff, and it was like, oh, that title really failed. Hey, we've got 5 fringe episodes out there, I believe, in the library. So if you want to think through the obscure, feel free to jump into that. If anyone knows a Bohemian, and not from the Czech Republic, we're talking about somebody who's a part of that secret society.
The Bohemian Society. Yeah,
yeah.
we still put out anybody who is a part of a secret society that we weren't even going to put on air.
Yeah, we would just like to have a conversation in secret.
Right.
So are we creating our own secret society?
Maybe.
Nice. Maybe that's what we need to do. You have to do a sign up. You got to do an email sign up to be able to listen to Cut Daisies and Unicorns. And we're like, we are the secret society.
Yeah, and maybe by talking, we create a secret society that we would like to keep secret, but we're even changing another secret society.
I don't know. I know that what my future holds for me, if you want to get back to time travel, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
I know my future holds for me in the next 72 hours. I am going to go see one of those birds that aren't real down at the lake.
Ah, there you go.
The seagull who comes back to visit me.
Right.
I think he remembers that I fed him chips the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But he comes up and he chirps at me and he looks and he ruffles his feathers and then he spreads his wings and then, yeah. And if you really want a question that I don't know the answer to, here's the question for the day. Which bird is telling all the birds to take off at the same time?
The lead bird.
Chirp. All right. Well, hey, if you remember the cartoons from back in the late 60s, early 70s, maybe even into the mid 70s to late 70s with the 2 old crows sitting on the telephone wire talking to each other, let me leave you with that picture, all right?
Yeah.
Here we are. We've got our own crow call going.
2 old crows.
2 old crows.
Squawking away.
Sitting in a row. You'd like to see us in our human versions of ourselves, but what we really are is we're 2 birds that aren't real, talking to you, disseminating information that couldn't even be conceived as true.
Creating secret societies.
Yeah. So transformation is a lie. Don't even try it.
That's how we end. Boom. Boom.
All right. It's been good.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.
And next week.
We will.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's episode 10 next
That's
week.
episode 10. And we're going to look at the calendar and see when we can get a live episode on the books, because I don't know it's going to work out on the first week because of everything going on. But anyway.
We were talking about cooking on that episode, too.
You know what? We do the live cooking episode. That would make sense, wouldn't it?
Right.
Yeah, we're going to need some help with the camera action.
We would.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I got 3 hot plates.
All right. There we go.
And I haven't had a cigar for a long, long time. So Oh man, if anything can mess up your taste buds, it'd be a big
That's
old
for sure.
stogie. Well, if I had the pipes, I would take you out with Sweet Child of Mine.
But then we'd also have to pay for it.
And we're not going to do that.
No.
Because we don't even have an assistant.
# not a sponsor.
Peace.
Peace.